If I was going to oversimplify, when people ask me what the rescue is or what we do, when I talk to people conversationally in Target or whatever, I say if a human can get themselves into that problem, it's our job to get them out of it.
Before we get going, just want to remind everybody about the Spring Thaw coming up on April 15th in Billerica. We have Chief Ikels, Captain DesRuisseaux, Chief Nardelli, and Lt Ray McCormack coming to do a lecture series. Tickets are $115. They include lunch and dinner. You can find a link to purchase them in the description, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. We hope to see you guys there.
Responses, engine 5, engine 3, engine 1, ladder 3, ladder 2, rescue 1. We've got full showing. Division 1, you're on location, box 23, reporting smoke show on 727.
JobTlks podcast members do not represent the cities and towns they work for in their views and opinions. They are views and opinions that belong to us only. We are not here trying to be the experts or tell people how to do their job. Our goal with this show is simply to facilitate knowledge sharing. All right. Welcome back. We are here back in season 3. We have a guest in the studio, Lieutenant Paul Morrison from the Cambridge Fire Department. Real quick, I just want to say thank you guys for everything. We're going to hit being on about a year now in the season. Super thankful for everything you guys have done, all the support, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like us on our social media. You know the drill by now. Paul, thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you,
I'm pretty excited. Listen, I'm fangirling just slightly. I would never tell you that to your face, though. So, gonna go a little bit through your bio and then kind of just talk about some stuff. So, the idea of this episode is really just kind of interview you. You've had a pretty significant career for what you've done. You've been involved in a lot of things, big on the tech rescue, which is, what we're here to talk about today. And so we'll just kind of go through all of that. And then, at the end, maybe talk a little bit about like the rescue mindset and stuff like that. So
Sure.
First off, you're a 3rd generation firefighter.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I'm very proud at the fact that, my family's been in the fire service in the Metro Boston area for 77 years now.
That's awesome.
Without a break in service. So
Wow.
That's awesome.
Anybody carrying the torch?
I don't think so. I think we're at the
know.
end. It's me and my cousin. My cousin's on the job in Dedham. We're the only ones left, and I think that's probably going to be the end of it.
Got it.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah. So this image right here is a big one for me. It's actually my first. I basically grew up in a fire station.
Yeah.
So my mom's dad, my dad's dad were both on the same ladder company in Boston, specifically in Charlestown, Ladder 9.
Wow, that's cool.
And this was his last day on the job. So,
Oh, wow.
So he retired in 1981. And this is us. That's my amazing bowl cut over there on the right.
I had a similar haircut
If you didn't have
in
one of
high
those.
school.
And I like to think, what is it, 40-something years later, that I still have the same smile when I'm in a fire station. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
So we talked a little bit about stuff like before we got into this episode. You grew up in a fire station and you didn't want to become a firefighter. Is that right?
That's correct. Well, so when I was a kid, it was like all I knew, right? So Dad was a fireman. My dad's older brothers were also firefighters in Boston. So rich history within the Boston Fire Department within my family. Dad was on the job in Arlington, and some of that has to do with the fact that there was some hiring challenges in 1974 when he got on the job. So he was hired in the right before I was born.
Oh wow.
In Boston or
In Arlington.
In Arlington.
And Dad stayed. And back in those days, people didn't move.
Right.
You know, people had a different loyalty for their employer and
individual.
for their organization. So once you got hired somewhere, you pretty much stayed.
We actually
stayed there.
talked a little bit about that in like our generational gap episode, like
Yeah.
the difference in generations of being loyal to like the job versus being loyal to just the career field. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting.
Will had a 78-minute long slideshow about that. All the different things.
Thanks, John.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, so my granddads were in Charlestown on a ladder truck. They were Tillerman. They drove the rear end of a tractor-drawn aerial.
That's
amazing job. They had come back from World War II. Dad's dad was in the Navy. Mom's dad was in the Marine Corps. And they came back at different times, but they both landed in the same place.
wow.
And it was a relatively, even though it's part of the city of Boston, it's a relatively small community. So
Right.
it was only natural for my folks to meet each other and
Right.
and get together. So
That's pretty sick. And people that don't know about Charlestown, the town, the movie, right? That's about Charlestown back in its heyday.
yeah,
So just real quick, if you don't mind talking about it, you said Navy and Marines during World War II. So were they both like Pacific campaigns?
yes,
That's awesome.
They were.
That's awesome.
I don't exactly know what their roles were then. Both of them were pretty stoic guys.
Yep.
And so it was hard for me to go and pick their brain about a lot of things. So I just tried to like sponge what little things that I could get from them just through
Pretty-
conversation.
Yeah.
Brutal theater, no matter where you.
Yeah,
are.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it just super common of those times again is like a lot of those World War II vets didn't talk a lot about the war coming back, and now it's kind of, I don't want to say it's sad, but it's like a little bit later we're realizing all these stories that are like being lost every day. And so like I know there's the guy that does the rifle that goes and interviews these guys. I actually, just a side note, talked to Nick about going. My wife's grandfather was in Pearl Harbor. He's still alive. He's 102.
Wow.
So
That's worth
I'm
an
trying
interview.
to. I did my own Zoom interview with him, but I'm trying to get Nick to go to Phoenix with me and actually film like a full interview with the guy.
That'd be amazing.
But yeah, it's common of the times is those guys. A lot of the stories and what happened over there died with them. Unfortunately, I don't know if your folks are still alive, but that's some like serious shit.
Yeah. So they came back and they got hired on the Boston Fire Department and they worked there. My dad was the third of 10 children.
Holy cow!
So his two older brothers were both firefighters in Boston. His oldest brother Jim was a captain. Eventually retired as the captain of Rescue 1.
Wow.
And my uncle Stephen was on an engine company for pretty much most of his career in Charlestown.
So they all stayed not only like local Boston, but they all kind of worked in Charlestown where they grew up.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
they
pretty
moved
cool.
around a little bit until they figured out what they really liked or whatever. But they kind of got their way back to home.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Very
That's
cool.
awesome. So at what point was it that you realized that you did want to become a firefighter?
So when I was a kid, it was like the only thing that I did. So that's kind of where so my dad was a member of a social group in Charlestown. They built this. It's a bar, for lack of a better term, and it's called the Halligan Club.
Yep.
And so during the process of that place being built out, I spent a lot of time there. And growing up, we did all kinds of events there and stuff. So like literally everybody that I knew was firefighters.
That's awesome.
So it was something that was basically ingrained in me at a very young age. And then when I got to my teens, I started to kind of reject that stuff.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
You know.
is that why you kind of wanted to explore other things, because you wanted to get out beyond?
I think so.
Yeah.
I definitely think so. And then, some of that exposure to those folks went away. So my parents split when I was like 10. So access to the fire guys went away at that point. So
Right.
I think I started to give my attentions to other things or whatever and develop different ways, different ideas about what I was going to do with my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I apologize. The question was, when did I actually decide that I was going to go into the fire department?
Yeah.
So I kind of fell backwards into that. We talked about that recently. I rejected it for a little while, and I had a lot of ideas about going into the military. And so I graduated from high school in 1992, and we were basically involved in, at the time they called it Desert Shield, and then it turned into Desert Storm.
Yep.
And it ended up being a relatively short actual war campaign. But during that process, I had taken, leading up to it, I had taken the ASVAB. I had a lot of recruiters at the house.
Yep.
They were talking to me about being a submariner and being on a sub and all that other stuff. And it didn't sound very appealing to me.
Yeah.
And
That doesn't sound appealing to me at all.
No,
yeah.
Not even a little bit.
And so like being the oldest of 3 boys and with a single mom, most of her ideas affected a lot of my decision making.
Yep.
And she basically said, "You're not going in the service. Like we're about to go to war,
Right.
and I'm not having it."
Yeah,
Right.
and at the time, Desert Storm was going to be like the mother of all wars. It was
Yeah.
like a million-man standing Iraqi army.
Yeah.
It was supposed to
Well,
be huge.
that's what we talked about. Is it ended up being, that's the 100-hour war or whatever they
I believe it
dubbed
was.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But nobody knew that, right? Everybody thought it was
Yeah,
going to be
going
this.
into it was going to be a long deal.
I remember my dad was in the Air Force and we were in New Mexico, and I remember him like watching the news with like his bag packed, like waiting to like hear if he was going to be. He didn't end up going, but like at the time, like nobody knew what was going on.
No,
so.
they had. I watched a documentary on it a few years ago, but they had a ship that was like moored in the Persian Gulf that had there's just like 50,000 body bags because they were expecting.
Wow.
It was
They were
a
expecting
million
to take
man.
those kinds of
Yeah, it was a
casualties.
million-man standing army
Yeah.
of the Iraqi army.
Which is absolutely insane. Yeah. So you didn't end up going.
Yeah,
'cause
so
mom said
mom wasn't
no.
having it.
Yeah.
And so I went along with that.
Yep.
And she's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I really want to get on the fire department. I kind of had like this, I kind of did this 180, and I was like, I really have to go in the fire department. My mom had a pretty big job at the time, running a nursing home or a couple of nursing homes. And she had some friends in the EMS industry. And she's like, I have a different path for you. We can get you to the fire department if you go and become an EMT.
Yeah.
And so I became an EMT. I was actually, I graduated high school, and then I went basically straight to EMT school. I was kind of
Awesome.
doing,
Wow.
I was doing a little bit of college and EMT school simultaneously.
Yeah.
And my attentions went towards EMT school.
Yeah.
I never actually finished my degree.
I feel like that's a common thread in the fire service. A lot of guys start on one path and realize like, oh, I actually like doing this. You know what I mean?
So my 19th birthday, I was working on the ambulance. So it was, yeah.
Good for you.
I've been doing this a long time.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I won't ask you how old you are, but you've been in the fire service for 24 years.
I'm 48.
You're
Yeah.
48.
Yeah.
All right. So you got some got good experience. When
Yeah.
did you're also a paramedic. So when did you end up going to medic school?
So back to mom's path for me, EMT was at the time, EMT was the thing to do.
Yep.
And then there were so many EMTs on the fire department. You weren't a commodity at that point.
Yeah.
As an EMT.
Right.
So the paramedic thing was already in existence. There was still many paramedics providing care out in the field, but the fire department was starting to show interest in that side of things.
Right.
So to make yourself marketable in the early 90s, it made a lot of sense to go to to paramedic school after EMT school.
And that's still the case today. Is if you
One
want
of
to
the
be
most marketable.
yeah, if you want to be super marketable to get yourself in the door of the fire service, medic is a good way to do that.
Especially if you don't take the active military service route.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the only reason I ended up in Cambridge. I think is the two combined together. It's the only reason I ended
a lot
up
of places
there,
you
so.
have to. I mean, I feel like Cambridge, Boston, some of the larger Somerville, some of the larger departments are unique in the sense you don't necessarily have to have it.
Yeah.
But in a lot of those outlying, they
Yeah.
will only hire firefighter paramedics.
Once you leave the city, like I feel like it's or not the city, but like the immediate metro, like the UASI for us in our area, the UASI district, like it's almost a requirement in a lot of places, like you said.
It's rare to just hire a firefighter.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind
Yeah.
There are a handful that don't like I think Newton doesn't require anything. I don't even think you have to be an EMT, and maybe Brookline, and then outside of that, even like at Cambridge, Boston, and then outside of that, like you have to have something.
Maybe
Yeah.
Somerville.
Yeah, it's
And
crazy.
that was the only way that I was initially hired as a
Right.
firefighter, and we'll be getting there in a second. But
Yeah.
that's how I was initially hired in Hingham
That's awesome. So what year did you get hired in Hingham?
in 1998,
1998.
and
Okay.
they were starting a paramedic program. They had they had a paramedic on staff who was not hired as a paramedic. He was a resident in Hingham.
Yep.
And then I was the second paramedic hired with the intent of starting a paramedic service. So we had not even enough paramedics to
Staff.
for 4 shifts.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
all.
My mom grew up in Hingham, actually.
Yeah. So is that
It's a
where?
really, really nice town.
Yeah, on
Where did
Hershey
you guys-
Street. I don't know if you know where that.
What is it, Hersey?
Hershey Street.
Yeah, I know that street very well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a small town.
We
There's
actually
small road
we had a
connections.
guy on the job whose last name was Hersey.
Oh, really?
The street was named after his family was in Hingham forever. And,
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's a small world stuff right there.
Yeah.
I like that. So did you guys land in Hingham or in that area, or is that just who was hiring at the time?
So at the time, a lot of fire departments were interested in the paramedic service thing.
Yep.
And so we were getting cards. If you were a paramedic and you had taken the civil service exam, you were getting cards from all over the state.
Wow.
They were like cold calling people.
Right.
And so I don't even remember if I selected Hingham as one of my choices just because it wasn't I didn't live there.
Right.
I didn't know that they were interested in paramedics, so it was just kind of outside of my focus.
So that's what I was wondering. So when your parents split, you guys didn't end up going down to Hingham in that
no.
area. It just was like a car.
No, we ended up down. We moved around a lot,
Right.
for a little while,
Yep.
and then ultimately we landed in Plymouth.
Oh, okay.
So
Awesome.
being on the South Shore was good for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just for people who don't know, when they say getting cards, what used to happen when you took in Massachusetts, when you took the civil service test, is the department literally mailed you a card saying, hey, we have a job opening. Like, we'd like you to come sign the list to go through the process,
Yeah.
right? Now that's all done by we still say we get cards, but we
Yeah.
don't actually get cards.
Right.
anymore. We get
Yeah, it was
emails.
physically a postcard that
Yeah.
indicated that they were interested in
Right.
coming in.
I still remember the day I got a card from Cambridge.
Yeah, I got 2. I got one, and it didn't lead to anything. And then, so I was like pretty sad about it. And that was the group that came on just before the summer before you did. And then I got a second one. And the day I got the second card, I got an offer from Marlboro for a job. And so I called the chief and I was like, Chief, listen, here's the thing. I will take that job, but you have to know that I take it back. So I actually called the chief at the time, Gerard, and I was like, Chief, I know you can't tell me anything. I just want to know, will I have a chance to interview? And he said something like, I can tell you that we put cards out to this many people and this many people signed the list. And I was like, that's all I need to know. So I called the Marlboro chief, Chief Breen, like all the respect in the world. He was awesome. I told him, I said, listen, I'll take the job if you want to still offer it to me, but just know that I can't not go through this process. And he was like, I wouldn't want you to not go through the process. He said, I'll tell you what, go through the process. If something doesn't work out, I'll put you on the back burner. And I was like, dude, having somebody do that was just like amazing. But
Quick funny side story. I don't know if I ever told you this story. So when we were doing the background check, the interview process at the police station, and we all show up in suits, we're all like in a line, and I won't say his name. He ended up being a really good fireman and a good friend, but he showed up late in like gym attire and like completely disheveled. And it was Donnie Fitzgerald was behind me in line, and we're just looking at each other like, well, that guy's not getting hired. Ended up getting hired, and he's actually a good fireman. Yeah,
that's awesome.
But he just showed up late. He's like, oh, sorry, I just came from the gym. I got my days mixed up. And he's like, I figured it'd be better to come than come and be disheveled than not come at all. I was like, I don't know, buddy. But he ended up getting hired.
I mean, I've seen people come in just to sign the list.
Yeah.
In a full on suit.
Yeah.
So there's a wide range of attire.
They have on the intake is like a checkbox is properly dressed for the interview or whatever. Like it was like a actual checkbox on the paper that was there.
He did not check that box. No.
Still got hired. Good for him.
Yeah.
So you got hired in Hingham in 1998.
Yes.
How long were you in Hingham?
Until 2004 when I was hired in Cambridge.
Awesome. And so your time in Hingham, you had told me you had some pretty interesting things happen. So like you like said you were startup for the ALS service. You ended up doing coverage for the Worcester cold storage fire. Yeah,
so that was an interesting situation. Obviously a tragedy. In 1998. So do you want to? Yeah, we'll touch that, and then we'll talk about the training piece too.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Because that's kind of where my love for training came. I had to fight for that.
Okay.
But yeah, we were. I was a relatively new firefighter. I had just gotten out of the fire academy. So I just developed this sense of community with other firefighters outside of my department because I didn't go straight to drill school, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that was one of the other things we want to talk about, yeah.
So there were people in my class from all over the state, and I remember watching these events unfold on the TV. I think we were actually sitting in a bar watching it.
Yeah.
And it was just such a tragedy that just everybody in the state wanted to do something. And the department was so focused on the Worcester Fire Department was so focused on trying to do the things that they needed to do at the scene, that it was one of the first times that I had ever seen them use like a task force or strike teams to come out and staff fire stations from all over the state. So the different, if I remember correctly, I think the different counties each worked a shift out there. So we literally convoyed out there from Plymouth County one night, and and I actually had to pull some strings to get on that assignment. But I was like, there's no way that a Hingham fire truck is going to run out of a Worcester fire station, and I'm not going to be there.
Right.
So
that's wild.
So we did a night shift.
Yeah.
And didn't sleep the whole time. We had a pilot, if you will, that obviously had knowledge of the city, a Worcester firefighter. Yep. And yeah, we ended up fielding some calls. We didn't get to actually go to any fires that night, but I just couldn't sleep. I was just so excited to be working in a city.
Yeah.
You know?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So I want to get to the training portion of that, but before, so you attended actual state recruit school, which wasn't common for Hingham at the time.
Correct. So when I was hired, it was all on the job training.
Yep.
And so one of the things that people learn from on the job training is you're at the mercy of whoever your field training officer is.
Yeah.
Like what they value is the information that you get as a new person. And there's no standardization there.
Right.
So there was some concerns with my family and its very long history in the fire service of going to a drill school.
Right.
They didn't particularly care for the fact that I was just learning the job from whomever.
Right.
And they didn't even know the players. So they had, they had opinions, but they didn't know the people. And it was nothing against the individuals that I was learning from. But there was no standardization.
Right.
And so Marty Pierce, who was the commissioner of the Boston Fire Department at the time, who was a close family friend, offered, due to some complaints from my family members, offered to allow me to attend Boston's drill school. Wow. And the chief of the Hingham Fire Department at the time was not from Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
So he was a gentleman who was a chief in Illinois, or he had rose through the ranks at a fire department in Illinois, did some time in Texas, and then came out to Hingham for whatever reason. And he was actually, he was an interesting guy in that when it was time for me to make the move, he supported it because he had moved a couple of times himself. But he also acknowledged the fact that on the job training was not ideal.
Right.
But he basically said to me, this is a bedroom community. And his words were, there's no way you're going to learn to be a firefighter from city firefighters. So due to that offer from the Boston Fire Department, it kind of shamed them into saying, why don't we figure this out?
Yeah.
Like instead of who gets you training,
right,
let's deal with the state academy and figure out how to make this a thing.
Right.
And so in some backwards way, the complaints of my family.
A little lobbying campaign.
Yeah,
that's
kind of started that process. So that's when I really started to value the importance of proper training.
Right. And so the Hingham Fire Department has sent people since then?
Always.
Yeah. So that's
a positive.
Yeah, I mean, you have one random hire or one random event that changes like the course of a department. That's pretty
Always,
cool.
yeah.
That's awesome.
With the on-the-job training that you were getting, was the end result of that, like, would you still test out for year 1 and 2, or was it
No,
just
that wasn't even going to be
really?
an option.
Wow. Interesting.
And I had some, you know, it's important that I also note that I had some amazing mentors on the job there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the gentleman that I still to this day consider my mentor is he's since retired, but like all the classes I've taken, all the stuff that I've done, everything that I've done, this guy's still, in my opinion, my mentor. Who's good dude. So
yeah.
Yeah,
and like I think that's important to say is like it's not like the on-the-job training or like wanting standardized training isn't because people aren't awesome or good mentors or don't know what they're doing. It's just I feel like you need a base foundation to then build off of instead of like learning like, you know what I mean? Like you were saying, you need something that's standardized so everybody can learn to the same level, and then you can find your mentors on your shifts or, you know, maybe your shift does certain things different ways or whatever the case is. You know?
And there's a lot of specific tasks that we do on the fireground that are made better by standardization of training.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the thing that comes to mind like right off the bat is just as simple as like throwing ground ladders.
Yeah.
And how you communicate with people.
Right.
You know, there's a reason why it's so standardized and specific at the State Fire Academy. So I can go to a fire at a neighboring community.
Yep.
And we might throw a couple of the commands, like we might not yell that the paws are locked every time we climb the ladder after 25 years on the job, right? But that stuff is ingrained in us.
You're looking for it.
Everyone's speaking the same base language.
And it makes us so much more efficient.
Right. Or even just, like you're coming into a narrow area, you're going to throw it on the beam and you just set yourselves up and you just do it. But that's all because you had that base like drilled into you, like this is how you do it. And it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after the cold storage warehouse fire, sorry, jumping around a little bit, you ended up doing some training up there.
Yes. So as a result of the tragedy of losing those 6 firefighters at the Worcester cold storage fire, the Worcester Fire Department did an amazing job of like leaning in to that tragedy and leading into safety and survival.
Yep.
And so they held seminars every year for at least a few years where they brought in like the best and the brightest from all across the country in the fire service. So I was able to take classes with John Salka, all these amazing folks that had a tremendous amount of experience and passion for the job and for the safety of the troops. And it was eye-opening. It was all so there was lecture, but then the best thing about it is it was mostly practical training.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so they developed all kinds of things as a result of, everything that most of what we learn in the fire service, sadly is penned in the blood of lost people. Right. So
there's opportunity in tragedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we learned some techniques, safety, self-rescue techniques.
Yep.
And also rescuing your partner or your buddies.
Right.
That we would never even would have considered before.
So like RIT wasn't a thing back then.
RIT wasn't even a thing.
Yeah. So we were talking, me, you, and Eddie the other day about we talk about like the fire service 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress, but that's not always the case. So this fire you're talking about is 30, or not even 30. It was 24 years ago. I mean, it was 24 years ago.
Yeah.
It was 99, right?
Yep.
So in 24 years we've developed RIT programs. Radios was a big one we talked about. So
bailout kits.
Yep.
Yeah. So like back at this cold storage warehouse fire, like one of the things was only certain people held radios, so they couldn't communicate with downed firefighters in the building, right? So
I can't speak specifically to Worcester's situation, but it wouldn't have been surprising for me to find out that the company officer was the only one with a radio.
I think I had read that. I think I had read that before. That was one of the things too. So, it's not always 100 years of tradition, but it's often reactionary. Like you said, it's penned in the blood of someone else. And, bailout kits, you were saying.
Not to mention we all have our own personal ticks now.
Yeah, thermal imaging cameras. Oh,
and we have a similar story. You and I have a similar situation with the first TIC that was purchased in our departments.
So I mean that was
right?
that was a perfect segue. So we'll finish up about the training real quick. So how did you get involved with that? And you said that led to like your passion for training.
Yeah. So that was with the exception of the Mass Fire Academy and the excellent training that I got there. That was the first time that I did some real hands-on, hard, like full days of training.
Yeah.
Like utilizing crazy. At the time, it was outside of the box stuff. It was throwing a hose line out a window and sliding down it like a fire pole. Like nobody would have even considered that.
Right.
Wow.
Before then.
Yeah.
Or if one of your teammates fell through a hole in a floor or whatever, like instead of waiting for some weird assembly of ropes and some major thing, like just take a bite of hose, stuff it down there, have them grab onto it, and if they're capable of holding onto the hose, you just pull it in two directions and they
come right up. Yeah.
I'm simplifying it, but the long and the short of it is they could ride that hose up through the hole in the floor.
Right.
These were things that nobody considered before this.
Right.
So
we actually got taught that in the academy.
Amazing advancements that happened as a result of, unfortunately, the huge and tragic loss of life.
Right. That's and like I said, like the same thing. It's always like not always reactionary, but a lot of times reactionary. And I think like one of the things is like we owe it to the people that lose their lives to like make changes or at least like
innovate.
Innovate honestly, like reflect on what happened and how we could prevent it from happening again.
Yeah.
So jumping back to Hingham, perfect segue. So one of the things that you experienced in Hingham, again another first, is you guys were one of the first in the whole state to have a thermal imager.
We were pretty close. We had kind of an angel investor or a donor.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they wouldn't mind me mentioning them, and they deserve it. But Talbot's headquarters, worldwide headquarters, was in Hingham. Is in Hingham, and after that fire, they realized that, geez, somebody may have benefited from the ability to use thermal imaging as a technology,
right?
Which again wasn't really a thing,
right?
Like New York might have had one, Boston might have had one at the time, but they were rare,
right?
I bet maybe there were probably 5 in the state.
Yeah,
that's probably a fair statement to make in 1999. So, Talbot's had deep pockets, and they wanted to help us out, and it was on the forefront because people had seen it, and it was a tragedy. The president of the United States came to speak at that funeral. Right. So Talbot's donated our first. I believe it was actually our first and second TIC.
Yeah.
And they were huge.
I was going to say, what did that thing look like at the time? It was
So the original one on the market was made by Fleer.
Yep.
And it was either a helmet mounted one, or it was like it was relatively large.
Yeah.
The ones that we got were Bullard cameras.
Okay.
And they had like a backwards handle. So like you held it like this to orient the screen properly.
Yeah.
And it was large. And we would keep it, because it was so expensive, we would like keep it in a Pelican case. Like you would treat it like
back then those things were probably what, $20,000.
They were, I think they were like $20,000.
If memory serves, it was probably $20,000 to $30,000.
And you can buy a personal one for what, $500 now?
I guess so. Yeah,
like $600 for the little ones.
Yeah. So what you said you share a similar story about first and thermal imagers. Like, did you?
Yeah. So
that was donated.
That was our
right?
story too. So
right.
one of the big companies in town, the town of Stoughton at the time, one of the chiefs was like, "Hey, we need this," and they were like, "All right, well, get 2 then."
Right.
And literally cut us a check for like $40,000.
Do you guys all have your own thermal imagers?
Yeah. We have them all. Well, some guys.
As part of your pack?
Some guys use them, some guys don't. They're right on our pack. They just clip on. They're the small ones, the handhelds. But some guys take them off and they just don't use them.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, the last fire I was at, mine was sitting in the cup holder but I was like, you know what, that's fine. We have my lieutenant had a tick, and I had a full handheld tick, and we used it the day previous on what we thought was a fire. It didn't turn out to be one. And then I don't know if I left it on or what, but the next morning, right before shift change, we had a basement fire. So I grabbed the thing, I clip it on, I'm ready to go. I get off, I rip the line off. We're going in through the back door. We get downstairs, and I'm trying to turn the thing on to see where the fire was, because we really just couldn't see it. We could feel heat, couldn't see it, and the battery was fucking dead. I was like, what happened?
There's literally nothing worse.
Damn it, John.
So my lieutenant had his, but I'm sitting there trying to turn mine on. I want to see what he's seeing.
Yeah.
You know, it was a freaking
It's cool that you guys all have them.
just happened.
The
Like
first
that,
the first experience I've had with those handhelds is actually our academy we just did. There was like a little orange one that they were using for like the safeties walking around, and I mean it was a lot better than I expected it to be.
no, they're meant, dude. I think they're great. Some people have no use for them. They think they suck, but I think they're great.
Yeah.
So
I would use it. Yeah,
that's
I mean, yeah, why not? I mean, you know, it's one of those things like you might have another function, so somebody else might be using it, but for everybody to have one in case you need it is pretty sweet.
have it and not need it, then need it and not have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some words of wisdom.
Barry coming in hot. Coming in hot. All right, so you spent about 5 years in Hingham. Is that right? 98 to 2004. That's not 5 years. That's 6 years. Ish. And then were you obviously you enjoyed your time in Hingham. You said you had some great mentors, but decided that you wanted to try to get on a bigger department, or
yeah. I mean, I kind of always had eyes on the Boston Fire Department, and you know, not being a resident in Boston, not being a vet, it just wasn't going to pan out.
Right.
So I had a couple of friends. I'm not gonna dig deep and come up with some strange ways to say their names, but I had some friends that worked the ambulance with me, Scott Foltz and Mike Donovan.
Schmott, Colts, and Smike Funnifin.
Yeah, I worked with Scott and Quincy for Brewster. He's a good dude.
So they
Great guys.
both came from down that way. We worked together on the ambulance when we were kids, and
Young bucks.
and they had gone to Cambridge.
Yeah.
And they were like, hey, this Cambridge Fire Department's awesome, and they're gonna be hiring paramedics. Like, they want to start this paramedic service.
Yeah.
So if if you didn't select Cambridge as one of your choices, you should probably make some changes with civil service.
Yeah.
And so I can't remember if I did, and I definitely made the changes based on their advice. And yeah, it worked out. Ended up working out for me.
I didn't realize you had that connection to Scott Volk. That's my captain. He's a good dude.
Yeah,
dude.
We've been friends a long time.
So you got hired off the civil service test for Cambridge. At
Correct.
the time, it was one of the very few times they brought in transfers. Is that right?
Lateral transfers happened a couple of years afterwards.
A couple of years after.
Yeah.
And that's like,
And that was like maybe there was like a one-off.
yeah, that never ever happens. And so they put on, how many medics did they put on that list?
I think my class was 19 or 20.
That's a lot. So that was when they had the plan that they were going to start the squads.
Correct.
So for people that aren't familiar with our department, Cambridge, we run ALS, but we're kind of a unique service where we run what they call it, kind of a first response service. So we have some dedicated ALS companies, but we don't have transporting ambulances. And so they were putting the squads on, and the squads went up in 2005, 6?
May 1st, 2005.
And why do you remember that date so well, Paul?
So, so it just so happened that I was assigned to Group 2. I spent a little time on Group 1, but I've been basically in Group 2 my whole time in Cambridge.
The best group.
So
I can concur.
It just so happened that on that day that the squad was placed into service,
Inaugurated.
Group 2 was working.
Yep.
And to the point that I came to work that morning without a vehicle. So the vehicles were not in service yet.
Oh, wow.
We were actually putting the equipment on the squad on May 1st. Yeah, May 1st in 2005. And we were not completely finished stocking the truck when a box was struck for a structure fire. And so the squad company, their first call
Ever.
from the moment that they were placed in service was a structure fire.
It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Very cool. So check off another first.
And it was legit. It wasn't just like
yeah.
food on the stove.
It was an actual work.
Yeah.
It ended up being a work.
Yeah, it
fire.
wasn't padding the stats. It was legit.
Yeah.
Cool.
We don't pad the stats.
Nobody.
We don't ever call one codes for random things.
Oh,
So that's pretty sweet. So
It was cool. It was and I wasn't even originally they weren't even sure that I was going to be on the squad. That was kind of a decision-making process that was that was made during, so I was hired in I was hired in 2004, and the squads went up in May of 2005, and so I was assigned to Ladder 1 in the time in between. So my initial assignment was Ladder 1. And then they were deciding who was going to be able to operate on the squads, and then eventually I was fortunately selected to be one of those folks.
When you eventually do retire, because we all have to, you're gonna have a pretty solid general order with your assignments going through it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
so you were initially Squad 2, Group 2?
I was.
Nice. Who do you know? Like, who came up with the idea of this? Like, was that modeled after another service somewhere? Like, who came up with like, this is how we're gonna do it?
I think there was probably a lot of people involved in the process, but I was getting insider information when I was going through the hiring process.
Yep.
Through some family friends, and I think if you had to say one person, I would say Chief Reardon.
Yeah.
Was the person who saw the value in it.
Yeah.
And decided, like they decided that how it was going to go and what their role was going to be. And so it was a cool opportunity for sure.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
awesome. So you both caught fires on your first days.
There's a lot. It's actually funny. There's a lot of people that started their career. A lot of people in the Cambridge Fire Department started their career with a
one of the guys on your group that got hired with me caught a fire. I think his first shift. I was bullshit about it. Story Street. I think it was, yeah, Story Street. So when did you realize that like tech rescue was like your passion? So I think that everybody in the fire service at some point has like. I don't know if you want to say an epiphany, but realizes that they enjoy specific parts of our job, because there's a lot to our job, right? And like people end up liking, like they like look at the water thieves guys. These guys are all about getting water. People are all about pump operations, ladder. When did you realize like, hey, tech rescue is like my jam? This is what I want to do.
When I first got hired in Hingham, I was basically hired to work the ambulance, and the ambulance went to fires. They called it a rescue.
Yep.
We can talk about that afterwards.
Yep.
But so one of my initial partners, who is now deputy chief in the Hingham Fire Department, was very active in tech rescue, and so I would just kind of observe him doing some things, but we didn't really do a lot of tech rescue response. And they had developed, or they were developing, the Plymouth County Tech Rescue Team at the time. And so he would do cool things that I had never seen before. So like we would take the aerial out, and he would throw the stick, and he would climb up to the top of the stick. He would rig his own anchor point, and he would literally roll over the tip of the stick and rappel to the ground. And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
If someone ever saw me do that today, I feel like I'd get reamed out so hard.
Yeah. And I was like, that's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So then I just started to kind of pick his brain, and just kind of through osmosis, started to develop an interest in those things.
When did you get your first opportunities to really like get involved? So I know you got assigned to the rescue in I forget. When did you, 2001, you said? 2010?
Yeah.
It'd be hard to get assigned before you got hired. So I know you got assigned to the rescue company. Is that like when you first really got the opportunity to like start attending schools, or were you able to do that?
I was able to do that through the state academy, kind of like on my own.
Yeah.
But as far as like on the job training and things that we have access to and opportunities on the Cambridge Fire Department, that I've never seen opportunities like that anywhere else.
That's awesome.
Typically, I can't speak to everybody, but typically if you want to take those kinds of trainings, you have to go somewhere to take it on your own time.
Right.
You know, there's not a lot of opportunities while you're on shift to do these things.
Right. Which is awesome.
Yeah.
That's our department pinned. I mean, it's like, if you want to do something, you got to go out and do it.
Yeah.
We do general trainings for our everyday stuff. We want to be really good at the basics, things like that.
Yep.
But anything specialty, I mean, you're looking at getting on a regional team.
Yeah.
Right.
You're looking to
Taking
go
a
do all
trainer,
that training by yourself. And then when you're on shift, it's almost like none of that training really matters because you're the only one. So even if you're a tech rescue guy, you're waiting for a tech rescue team to get there.
So
Speaking of which, I sent a follow-up email. I'll have you know. Follow-up email number 4.
Brown paper bag, dude.
Brown paper tickets.
All right.
oh, really? Nice.
Well, I'll let you know how it goes, Johnny.
So
Class action.
One of the things talking about that is interesting. You brought up Plymouth County. So our next episode is going to be with Justin Silva, and he's on the Plymouth County Tech Rescue team, and we're going to talk all about how like it's much different for suburban communities with the tech rescue than working on a rescue in the city. So that's going to be another interesting episode. And I feel like it's super, like it's awesome that we can do that stuff. And so I've done a decent amount of training with you. I mean, very, very scratching the surface stuff, but like it's good that we can do that because right now the State Academy is so full and understaffed that it's hard to get into those classes.
Yeah.
So having the opportunity to do that and not have to like you've done some training on your own. I know you guys actually did a rope class together that I wasn't able to go to, but you either have to spend money and a good amount of money because these programs are not cheap, or be able to
That's the only reason I did it is just because like to get to the technician level, it just takes a long time in the academy.
Yeah. Tell me about
There's
it.
just unfortunately not, there's not a lot of instructors at the State Academy.
Yeah.
They have limits on what they can offer based on what they have for staff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard to deliver enough classes to serve everybody that wants to go.
Right.
And so people tell me all the time that they get waitlisted.
Yeah.
And in some cases, people are waiting for years to get into a class.
Yeah. That happened to me. I waited for a very long time to go from rope ops to rope tech. And then when I did, they had changed the requirements for rope ops, so it didn't count. So I actually got booted from the rope tech class.
That's a bummer.
So now I'm down to nothing. But it is what it is. Not talking bad about the State Academy. It's just a tough. They're just in a tough spot.
Yeah, they're trying to serve the most amount of folks, and they're trying to make do with the resources that they have, and it's just hard to. It's sometimes easier.
Yeah.
To pay for a class and travel a little bit.
Yeah.
And get those trainings.
And credit to guys that actually take advantage of it.
Gives you great exposure to like systems and other departments and ways of doing things that you otherwise wouldn't have exposure to.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So let's see, where are we at? Oh, so you got into tech rescue.
Yeah.
Obviously you love it. You've told me you're a tech rescue guy through and through. I actually remember being at a call with you. I think it was the hazmat. The one that ended up being a hazmat, and I saw you had like the little blue lines over your yellow tets when you got assigned to the squad as lieutenant.
Yeah.
And I was like, "What's up?" He's like, "Well, it's not really the rescue." And I was like, "Well, that hurts my heart just a little bit. Thanks very much."
Yeah. As somebody who worked on the rescue as a firefighter, and then when I got promoted, I just didn't feel or it was appropriate. They told me I could keep the blue tats on if I wanted to, and I was like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. It's all right. I have the blue tats on my helmet.
I understand why people do it.
I have one yellow
I was told to
tat
do
left.
it.
I took mine off.
I have one yellow tat left.
My helmet's melted out.
Yeah. So you went to the rescue in 2010, and then you eventually studied, and you got promoted in 2020.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what it said on the thing, 2020ish. And so when you got promoted,
well, I was made temporary. I was a temporary lieutenant for a while.
Oh,
so
that's right.
So that's why the I should know the date.
Right.
It would be appropriate to know the date,
Yeah.
but it's fuzzy.
It's not as poignant as May 1st, 2005 in your mind.
Right. and as somebody, admittedly, somebody who's approaching 50, one of the things that you'll learn is that, for everything that goes in, something else has to go out. So
you only have so much bandwidth. That's Barry's favorite thing to
so
say.
I have to triage what's in the what's up
in the
now.
inbox.
That started happening to me in my 20s. So
if you make it to almost 50 before you have
me.
to do that, you're doing pretty well.
God help me.
You just have to declutter your inbox every once in a while. Get rid of the emails that don't matter anymore.
That's right. So you got promoted in 2020. to lieutenant, and you went back to squad 2.
Yes.
I was real quick. I don't know. Do you remember my very first call as a paramedic was with you? Bay State Pool. The guy that got shot.
Was it a shooting?
Yeah, the guy that got shot.
Yeah.
Wedged behind the dumpsters, and then we
Yes.
ended up getting pulses back and
Yes.
diverting from Mount Auburn. I didn't know if you remember. It was you and I think it was Phil.
Yeah, Phil was my lieutenant.
Yeah. My very first call with Lieutenant Morrison was my very first call as a paramedic was with Lieutenant Morrison, and it was a guy that got shot in the head.
That's an interesting one to start your career.
Yeah,
as well.
We were sitting at the base, and it came in, and I was like, oh. So back in those days, you had to do points to get your medic, so it was slightly different than it is now, and you had to get 100 points, and everything was worth so many, but like you could only use one, like you could only use so many IVs, right? You can only get so many points from IVs. So in order to get enough points to become a medic, you had to get an intubation or a shock. Use electricity. Yeah. And
it was during ride time?
Yeah, during ride time.
They waive all that stuff now.
Yeah, so it's different now. So back then you'd get people that rode for 1,000 hours or 1,500 hours before they got the chance to tube or shock somebody. And I got tube, shock, meds. I got everything. Our very first call, I got almost all
150 points right after that.
And it was a terrible call, but the guy ended up, he was young, and his organs ended up going to a lot of people, and so as much of a positive outcome as you could have, I guess. I ended up having to go to court. What's weird is me being the third rider had to go to court twice for that call.
Wow.
I had to go once. He was convicted. They declared it a mistrial, and I had to go back again.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't know if you remember that or knew that was me.
I remember the call, and I remember you being there.
Yeah.
But I didn't know at the time that it was basically it was like a first for you.
It wasn't even, technically I wasn't even a full-fledged. It was my very first medic call on ride time.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So long history, Paul. You might not remember it, but I do.
Yeah.
So you got promoted in 2010. You went back to Squad 2. And then you recently made your way back to the rescue.
I did. And I got to tell you, it's important that I acknowledge the guys at first of all, my partner at Squad 2, Jose.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
One of my favorite people. Yeah, he literally made my job easy.
Yeah.
Like effortless.
Yeah.
And then all the guys down at Lafayette Square were just amazing to work with.
Yeah.
But the opportunity presented itself. I always had eyes at going back to the rescue.
Yep.
Because it broke my heart to leave there as a firefighter.
Right.
You know, when I took the exam and I got promoted, it literally broke my heart to leave there. I was just so happy.
Right.
You know, and I loved my group. I love what we were doing.
Yep.
I love the guys that I work with. And so, but I was like, if I'm ever going to be a rescue boss, I have to, like you have to accept it. You're going to have to move on and try something else or do something else for a little while.
Right.
So I did that, and kind of as soon as I was capable, I indicated interest in going back to the rescue, and some things unfolded that allowed me to go back there much sooner than I ever had anticipated.
Right.
I thought I was going to be at Squad 2 for many years before I got the opportunity to go back to the rescue.
It wasn't very long. It was like a year, or if that, right?
My time at Squad 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I think it might have been just a little bit over a year.
Yeah. And so, like, I just want to point out, like, so we were on the same group. I didn't have a lot of exposure, like, working with you on the fire. But we did several calls when I worked for the ambulance company for the city. But one of my first calls that I did when I had this, like, oh, this motherfucker knows his shit. And I think I've already told you, it was a simple elevator rescue, right? And, like, go up, and I'm sitting there like, I have literally no fucking idea what I'm doing. And you came up, and I think it's like a point of how knowledgeable you are in something when you talk the victim through their own rescue. So you talk to that person through opening the elevator and getting through the elevator from the inside without even being able to see it.
Yeah, we've had a lot of success doing that.
Yeah.
I was taught right.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of experience doing that, and I've been trying to, like, pass that on, you know. So
that was my real first, I don't want to say my first exposure to, like, working with you, but like at the time, I think you had been promoted. You were on, maybe you must have been on the rescue at the time then, if we were going, or maybe I was on over. It doesn't matter.
This call, the elevator call?
Yeah.
I was still a firefighter then.
You were still a firefighter,
Yeah.
okay. And I always knew that you knew your stuff, but like that was like, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. So then I picked your brain then, and then when you did get promoted, you went to Squad 2, we had, I don't want to say luxury, but we ended up catching a couple smaller fires together and like starting to pay attention to like radio presence and like communicating and like how you were able to like to me, like I thought you could think things through really clearly, and like I just it was something like I was like, oh, like this is somebody to watch and emulate in the fire service. So
Thank you.
yeah, so you're doing things right. And
Trying.
So you ended up getting not only to come back to the rescue, but you got to come back to your group,
Amazing.
right?
Never in a million years did I think that was going to happen.
Right. And it's a little bit different, obviously, because they had to pull in somebody else to replace you as a firefighter. But mostly, Rob was there at the time, right? And
No. So when I was there as a firefighter, the crew was Chris, Croaky,
oh, that's right, Croak.
Matt,
Okay.
me, and Peter.
Yeah. So I knew Peter and Maddie were still there. I couldn't remember if Rob. I knew Mike had come in after, but I didn't know if Rob had come in as well. So, so you got to be. It's 3 of the original 5-person crew there, and then you brought in 2. I'll never tell them to their face, but you brought in a couple studs there.
Yeah,
right?
no, such a good crew.
Yeah,
Such a good crew.
I'm extremely lucky.
Yeah.
Well, it's a reflection of you as well, like how good your crew is.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm just, I'm so lucky in that just no is not in their vocabulary.
Yeah.
You know, well, we're talking about people that any crazy idea that I have, they're like, okay, let's try that. Let's do that.
I've like I said, I've got to do some training with you, and I get some like, I love the mindset, and we're gonna talk a little bit like rolling into like the mindset of like the rescue company, but I love the mindset of the guys on your shift. So one of the things you'd said is like, hey, if there's anything you want to try, and I was like, well, I want to do that the Kelly burn technique for lowering somebody on bailout, and I was like, you know, I'm sure we have to use a dummy or whatever, and so we show up to do the training. They're like, no, Rob's like, put me on the freaking rope. Like, why are you gonna put a dummy on the rope? You got a human being right here, and so you know, it's good. Like it's just the mindset of the people to be like, let's actually train on this and do it like we would have to do it in real life.
It was funny the other day. I was going to tell you this on the show. Your crew had asked if for this episode if we were going to have open the phone lines for a call, specifically Rob Martinello. He was going to call up and be like, hey, this is Bob Martingello. I just got a couple questions for you. I was like, I don't think we're going to open the phone lines, Rob. And he's like, oh, you know, just let me know.
That would be amazing. I would love nothing more than to be heckled by my own crew.
And you got some hecklers.
Yeah.
You definitely have some hecklers.
Yeah, and they keep me honest too. That's the other thing too, is they have no problem telling me, you know, like they would literally do anything I asked them to do.
Yep.
But they're good about, they're really good about, hey boss, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
You know, so they're good. They're good
what a
guys.
great,
And it's
great
important.
crew.
It's an important dynamic. Like you talk about leadership. One is like not wanting to be in an echo chamber. We were talking about that on the way here this morning, and being open to like other ideas, but also like for guys leading up the chain of command to be able to say to their boss like, hey, I think like I'll do whatever you want to do, but have you thought about this? Like there might be a better way to do it, and that's just like I said, that's just a credit to some teamwork. So you also do a lot of training now, right? You're involved in doing a lot of training. So with the State Fire Academy.
Yes.
Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about like what you're involved with, like what do you train on, or what you train others on?
Yeah. So like, you know, because I had to like fight to get trained initially in my career in the fire service, I felt very passionate about training. And while I was in drill school, I was like, I really want to come back and teach here.
Yeah.
But I've always been one of those people that like, I believed you needed to go and get some street cred before you just come back and start teaching stuff.
Absolutely.
It's just my opinion. People have different ideas about that.
I think you're right about that. Because you can get really good at just training and beating training.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great foundation. But, and I just, an example, I actually spoke with someone about this the other day. It was like, get really great at training and figuring out what like the crux of the whole evolution is and how to beat it. But it's like, when we went to that basement fire the other day, like a week prior, we went to like a suspected basement fire that was nothing. And I was with one of my lieutenants, and on the way we game planned it. He said, "This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna, ventilate. We're not just gonna bust into the basement. We're gonna, this and that." He had a whole thing, like a whole game plan. And then the next week I was with a different lieutenant. We went about it, and we just basically busted in there. We didn't suspect it to be a screaming basement fire, but everything that I had talked about the week before kind of went out the window. And so it's like, and so we talked about it afterwards, and I'm like, even if we just go train on these things, you train what you train, and you find the crux of it, and you beat it, and then do you ever really create like that thought process of like going through steps and actually figuring things out, or are you just going in and kicking the training dummy's ass and going home like we did some good training today?
Right. There's certain training props on the market where it's just a matter of like beating the prop, but the prop doesn't necessarily provide you with like real world challenges.
Right.
It's a good place to develop muscle memory.
Yes.
It's a good place to get the reps in.
Yes.
Yep.
But there's obviously no better training than just actual experience.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And it sets, like you were saying before, it sets like a foundation. So it gives you a place to like, say it's like an entanglement prop or something, right? It gives you a place to be like, okay, I need to stop, think about what I'm doing, and focus. But you don't actually get, hopefully we never have to actually get experience on being entangled in wires, but you're never going to really get that experience until you do it. That's why I think, like we've talked about before, acquired structures are so important, because you're still not going to be exactly the same, but when you can light something in a building you've never been in, or like don't know the full layout, it can be a little, you have tight hallways, if maybe you have furniture or whatever, like that stuff is hugely important to make it as realistic as possible.
I think that's a hallmark of an experienced instructor too. I think I had told you about this, like at the first time I really experienced that was at the CMC class. When I went down there, like you could ask them a question, and it was like a hallmark of how experienced those guys were. Like you'd ask them a question, and then instead of like answering it, they'd be like, "Well, what system does Cambridge use? Do you guys use Petzl? Do you use CMC? What are you using for a system?" And then they would answer the question based off what you have.
Right.
So it's like they weren't just like focused on their narrow training regimen of the things that the package of the training. It's like, well, what is realistic for Cambridge? And then they would walk me through how to do that. I just thought that was so impressive.
Yeah, I think rope rescue is a really good one to identify issues there, in that it's concepts.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like it's not like there is only one way to do any one thing.
Right.
Yeah.
There are multiple ways, and as long as you do it safely,
right,
there are sometimes 1,000 ways to do certain things.
Right.
And if you master the concepts, then that's the real art, right?
Right. It's I think Jocko says it's not tactics. You need to master strategy.
Yeah.
Right. So like not the hyper focused part, but like the overall picture of what's going on.
Yeah.
So you teach rope rescue.
I do.
Right?
So I teach tech rescue for the state academy. So when I waited probably longer than I should have to apply to be an instructor at the academy. But I did want to have a certain degree of like self-confidence and just kind of be comfortable in my own skin to start delivering these sometimes heavy topics to people. I mean, we're like literally in training, every one of our students is allowing us to put them on a system that could potentially be, they're in harm's way, right?
Yeah,
everything that we do, to some degree, we're in harm's way, right? We try to make it as safe as we possibly can, but there's a degree of risk with everything that we do.
Yep.
So I wanted to have some experience before I went down that road. And so, I applied to work at the fire academy a few years ago now. And when you get hired there, you can kind of indicate interest in a certain aspect of the academy. I
just realized I thought like the state academy, you get hired and they put you places, but it's like you can do recruit, you can do call vol, you can do tech rescue, you can do officer, like it's crazy. So.
And in some cases you can do all of it depending upon what your availability is and your interests are.
Right.
But I lean towards tech rescue because I feel passionate about it. So I've gotten the opportunity now to teach for a few years rope ops, rope tech, trench, con space, surface water, and they have a lot of. They have a lot of really good programs.
Yeah.
But I'd be remiss if I didn't identify the fact that yes, I get to be an instructor. Yes, I get to do these things, but on a selfish level, I get exposure to some of the best and brightest minds in tech rescue.
Yeah.
I learn stuff every time I teach a class.
Yeah.
The folks that I'm not that great. I'm just adjacent to greatness. You know what I mean? Like I just happen to be. I happen to have the right Rolodex, or I happen to know the right people.
Sure.
Yeah. I think you actually went to a training class with a guy that I went to rope with. He's from Slidell, Louisiana. He's a training officer. I forget his name, but it was down in the what's that college that has like the huge
Texas
TEKS.
TEKS.
Yes.
TEKS?
Yeah, and he was from Slidell, and I saw some pictures, and there was a guy with a Cambridge. I was like, Paul? Yeah.
You had some. Cool. You actually had some photos from there, and I didn't end up putting. I don't think I ended up putting them in here.
It was like Disaster City USA or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we talked, and I'm certainly open to coming back and talking about certain specifics. And this is more like an overview or whatever. So if there's things that we don't get into today, that's
the hope is that that this is like this is Lieutenant Morrison, and we'll talk a little bit about rescue mindset here in a minute, and then at some point we'd love to have you back to talk like a specific. I think that'd be awesome. Whether it's con space or structural collapse or rope or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
So going back to something you said before, on Hingham you were on a rescue.
Yes.
And now you're on a rescue. So can you tell us what the rescue is? So different parts of the country, even different departments within the same state use the term rescue differently. So I want to say in Georgia, a rescue is an ambulance, and a squad is what you do. Here, a rescue is a heavy rescue. In Hingham, a rescue is an ambulance. So you want to give us an overview of what it is that you actually do, what your role is right now. Yeah.
So as a member of the rescue company, we're a citywide resource, right? So the city of Cambridge is divided in half. But as the rescue, where there's only the one of us, we go uptown and downtown to all structure fires.
Yep.
Let me see. So I got some got a little notes here. So so this vehicle here is we have five members staffed on that. It's a Pierce 39-foot walk around rescue. Roll up compartments. It's just basically a toolbox on wheels.
Yeah, it is a massive toolbox. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that I had no idea we even had.
I do have so this was a significant change from the previous rescue we had. Did you guys have a lot of input into going towards this from where we were?
We did. So when this vehicle was purchased, Sean White was the captain of the rescue, and Sean was very active and passionate about, or is very active and passionate in the world of tech rescue and the rescue company in general. And we've had some amazing officers over the years on the rescue company that have taught me most of what I know. And when they purchased this, there was some challenges to figuring out what we were going to be able to actually get on it in the way of equipment.
Right.
It was initially going to be shorter than this, and being able to get the Oshkosh rear wheel,
the counter
steering is what allowed us to opt for the larger vehicle size,
right?
So we can actually get it into places that we otherwise wouldn't be able to get it into,
right?
And by doing so, we were able to have a great deal of our equipment on this thing going down the road all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas before, we affectionately referred to it as the Rambulance.
Yes.
So it was
I remember that thing.
It was a fire truck cabin chassis.
That's what we have for our squad, which essentially is
Yeah.
That was a very unique
piece
of apparatus.
I think there were only like 3 or 4 of them made ever.
Yeah.
So it's a fire truck cabin chassis with ambulance rear end.
Yeah.
Oh,
it was a bigger.
Never mind. I don't have that.
It was a bigger than a regular ambulance, though, right?
You mean like the box?
Yeah.
It was literally like a fire truck front and a
Yeah, no, I know, but the cab,
yeah.
like
I
where the
wasn't
stretcher
following.
was way bigger. It was almost like the ones that Boston Med Flight uses, like that huge
yes,
long,
got it.
long thing on a. Yeah, I remember that
Definitely.
thing vividly from my time working the ambulance company. So you guys carry, I mean, obviously there's you can go as far in detail as you wanted to, which would probably take a really long time, but like, can you give us like, maybe this is a good part to transition into this like rescue mindset. So working in rescue is different than working, I mean, all jobs are different on the fire ground, right? So maybe talk a little bit about like what the rescue mindset is and like, so what your capabilities are, like what you do at a fire, and then like maybe what your capabilities are, for tech rescue. And I think I have.
Yeah. So I threw together kind of a list of our responsibilities and our expectations.
Yep.
So citywide structure fires.
Yep.
Motor vehicle accidents with entrapments, elevator entrapments, construction or industrial accidents, transit rail accidents,
Yep.
right? Hazmat, high angle, structural collapse, trench, con space, dive or surface water rescue, support the EOD folks
Yep.
on bomb calls
Yep.
or suspicious package calls. And we act as a rescue task force at like an active shooter events.
Right.
So
you guys don't do very much.
yeah, I mean that's just touching on.
I didn't hear medicals in there. You don't chase medicals.
We're also have the ability to provide
They do that as
ALS
well.
and a non-transporting capacity.
Right.
All
Which
right,
is
nice.
important for tech rescue, is that you can put somebody down in a trench or in the
you can have medics
wherever
at
you
that
could
point.
you could have medics at the point of
And so
Injury.
to go back to the foresight of Chief Reardon and the folks that he was taking advice from back when the squads went up, that was the initial design of the squads, was being
Right.
able to take paramedics and put them into a hazardous situation that would otherwise be off the table for ALS providers.
right.
So that was like the plan.
Right.
And then fortunately we were able to do that with the rescue as well.
Oh,
Right.
That's great.
Damn it! No, I don't have a job.
Sons of bitches. So I have a couple of this looks like this is one of the photos that you sent me. So this looks like it's not training. This looks like an actual.
This was an actual thing, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you guys have here?
So this was a car that this is up at the Fresh Pond Rotary
Yep.
near the CVS, and car, I think, crashed into another vehicle or whatever, went off the road, went down into an embankment, and we just supported it so that we could work around it while we removed the folks from it.
So I don't want to say this stuff is simple, because nothing when you get into tech rescue is really simple. Like there's a lot of thought that goes into stuff, but this is like a fairly run-of-the-mill type simple call to do.
Yeah, this would be like this would be novice level
Right.
rescue person stuff.
And then you said some of the things that you also do is you get into like industrial accidents. So you're starting to get a little bit more complicated in what you're doing. So this, I'm pretty sure this is a training.
This is a drill, yeah.
But can you just talk about what you, so this is real quick, just to paint a picture. This is Cambridge, and currently in our city, they are building a shit ton of high rises. I think that's an official number. And a lot of these high rises, they're in pit, as they're being constructed, they have pits that are 30, 40 plus feet deep that people are working in, on, and around. And they're all over our city right now.
Yeah, in some cases, they're putting parking garages under the buildings, right?
Right.
So they're going, some parking garages are 5-6 stories
Yeah.
subterranean.
Right.
So, yeah.
So you want to talk about, when we talk about construction accidents, there's a whole plethora of things that could happen, but this is like a below grade.
Is that the
Yes.
new DOT, like Volpe?
No,
No.
That I anticipate we're going to have
That's
many
gonna
of
be
these,
big, yeah.
many of these type situations though in the near future. I think this was on Main Street, and these photos are from probably 5 years ago.
Oh wow.
Yep.
And so yeah, we did a below grade rescue training. We lowered people down to the patient. We package them and then we remove them using the aerial as a high point anchor. And so that's Ladder 1 operating with us. They set up the high point for us.
So the tech rescue response in Cambridge is the rescue, Ladder 1, Engine 1,
yes,
and then the whatever squad, depending on what side of the city it is. Or we
oftentimes we'd end up pulling in both squads probably.
Yeah, and we also provide that package mutual aid. So I know we do, like with Somerville, we do like lab calls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what's different? Just get back to that like mindset. Is there do you feel like there's a different mindset to work in the rescue than, so you've had experience working, have you ever been on an engine assigned? In Hingham, you guys ran engines.
Yes.
Did you cross staff like ambulance engine, or you were?
Yes. I sometimes I would be able to rotate onto an engine or the Quint at the time. But
so you've done virtually every position in the that we have locally anyways in the fire service, like the main stuff. So what do you think is different? Like, is there a mindset difference for being on the rescue?
Yeah, I mean, I think rescue folks, tech rescue folks, they have a mindset in that they, good, bad, or otherwise, they have like an attention to detail. I think that they focus on small things. They try to master small things that eventually build into a complex set of skills.
Yep.
So that they can, achieve any task.
Right.
So if I was going to oversimplify, when people ask me what the rescue is or what we do, when I talk to people conversationally in Target or whatever, I say, if a human can get themselves into that problem, it's our job to get them out of it.
I like that.
And it doesn't even actually need to be a human, because oftentimes, if an animal's in a jam, eventually a human's going to go after that animal. So it plays into the risk-benefit analysis. But the one that comes to mind would be like a domesticated dog on the ice,
right? That
nobody wants to put themselves in harm's way to get,
right? Until
the owner of that dog goes to get it, and now we have a human. Now we have a very, very serious human problem, right? So, yeah.
And so when you get into tech rescue, we're going to touch just like a little bit on it, but like when you start talking about tech rescue, you start talking about stuff. This isn't like it's quick in the idea of as fast as you can put this stuff up, you're putting it up. But when you start really getting into tech rescue, you're not talking about super fast stuff. So you have to be able to sit back and think a little bit about like what's going on, putting the picture together before you go in. Do you think it's a little bit different than just charging like headlong into something?
It is, and I think that most of my daily focus is on making these complex tasks that we perform more efficient and quicker, right? Because if it's the kind of thing where I go to my chief officer and I say, I can get that person who's hanging off the building, but it's going to require an hour and a half to do so.
Right.
That's when my abilities as a rescue officer get taken off the table, and then they may or may not make a decision like maybe there's a quicker way to do it. Right. Maybe rather than put a person over the roof of that structure, lower them down to make that grab and then lower that person down to the ground, maybe we just smash out a window,
right,
and pull them in,
right.
So that's where the onus is on me to communicate with my chief officers, make them aware of the capabilities of my crew, and get them to understand so that they can trust us,
right,
to say, I can do this, I can make this grab, and I can do it efficiently,
right,
because sometimes people can tend to overcomplicate things. Yeah. And so my job is to try to find the not the fastest way,
right,
but the most efficient way to do something.
And I think that's an important distinction. Efficient is not always fast.
Yeah.
Just going to say, like you've said before, paralysis by analysis is a big part. So when you get into like overly complicated stuff, we talk about it with hazmat and some other things, like sometimes you start thinking about it so much that you can't make a decision, or you have a hard time making a decision, and being able to like make that decision and be efficient at what you're doing is hugely important. I also think what you just said is huge too, is like being on being on the rescue, you might get to a scene, and this is important for you as a lieutenant, but also so in Cambridge, we do acting lieutenants, so we don't hire an officer every time the lieutenant is out. The senior person on that company becomes the officer. So you and those guys have to be reliable in that if you have a situation and your deputy chief comes up to you and says, hey, how do we fix this? You got to be able to tell them, how do we fix this? Because not every deputy has been a tech rescue person.
One of the things that I've always kind of said is when people indicate interest in coming to the rescue as a firefighter, I oftentimes say, that's great. I hope you do. I hope that that's something that you aspire to, because I think everybody should want to be a rescue person, right?
Yeah.
Rescue guy. But on your first day on the rescue, the first day that I have said this a number of times, and I'm sorry if it sounds like a broken record, but on your first day on the rescue, the second you put that R in your helmet shield, it's entirely possible that a deputy chief is going to turn to you and say, what do you think?
Right.
And you have to be able to give them a legitimate answer that's not tap dancing or some BS thing. You have to actually have an opinion on that.
Right.
And so I say, yeah, I want everybody to be a rescue person. But I think that should be and listen, I also feel that to be a proficient and effective rescue person, due to the acuity of the calls that we go on and the how rare they are, I think it takes about 10 years to be that rescue person that's comfortable in your own skin.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you've responded to a number of calls at this point.
Right.
You've been to certain things. You've been to certain trainings just based on the amount of times that we train.
Right.
I think it takes probably 10 years for people to like truly feel comfortable.
Gain that experience.
Yeah.
Gain that street credit.
I've heard you guys mention a couple of times that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And so that can be a tough thing. That can be a tough challenge for somebody who's like, geez, I'm here now.
Right.
And somebody's going to ask me some questions and I'm going to have to answer them.
Right.
You got to know your shit.
Yeah.
I remember Rob on your crew. I think I said this maybe to you recently. Is I don't know if I was on a swap headquarters or whatever, but when he first got transferred over to the rescue and he was like ripping everything out of the cabinets, and he was just like, I don't want somebody to ask me where something is and I have no idea, you know.
Yeah.
And you need that mentality going into it, like you said, because day one, get me this, and you're like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's where I'm really lucky with the crew that I have.
Yeah.
Because we gel really well and we have a good time and we're friends.
Yeah.
But I also know like they take their responsibilities very seriously.
Right.
And they don't want to let anybody down, you know?
Right.
And I'm very lucky.
Yeah. No, it's a very high caliber crew.
Yeah.
Every time I
absolutely.
see those guys, I tell them.
Absolutely. Do you think that there is obviously a difference, but in your mind, what would you say is different between working a rescue in the city and being part of like a tech rescue team, like a district team? So I said we're going to have Justin Silva in here on the next episode, who's part of a tech rescue team, and we're going to kind of ask him this, some of these same questions. So for you, like being on a rescue, like a metro rescue versus being a tech rescue team, what do you see like the big differences are? And maybe some of the challenges that like the heavy rescue in the city faces that they don't, but some of the benefits,
Yeah. So as somebody who's worked in a suburban fire department that has a tech rescue team in that county, in Plymouth County, where Justin works,
Yep.
Versus like being staffed on a rescue all the time, I think some of the differences would be obviously, or let me put it this way: the advantages that I have in being on a staffed rescue at work is that if an incident were to come in, for example, a person hanging from a rope off of a building,
Yep.
within 5 minutes, I have at least 5 people on a rooftop building a system
Right.
to affect that rescue, make that grab, right? One of the challenges to being on a fully staffed rescue all the time is that based on that long list of items that I touched upon, we have to be proficient in all of them at all times.
Right.
And that's where you have to, you have to decide, what are we going to focus on? This is where you kind of triage the training, and listen, we're humans. I mean,
right.
I can only push these guys so hard, right? I mean, we have to, there has to be mealtime. There has to be other things.
I don't know. I've heard Group 2 rescue. You guys don't even believe in lunch.
Yeah, we're different. But
not on the other side of the city, anyways.
Yeah. tell your friends, as Matty McDonald told us.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, what did he say?
Yeah, tell your friends.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's actually a funny story. We can talk about that afterwards. But yeah. So the advantages are that we can do these things in a short amount of time.
Right.
And the challenges are, how do you stay sharp on them and also respond to a number of different calls?
Right.
How do you keep the tools in your kit sharp?
Right.
I would think that the advantages, and I wouldn't necessarily speak too much to it, but I would think that the advantages to being on a countywide tech rescue team are that all of them are there to some degree on a voluntary basis.
Right.
Right. And so when they do trainings, they're typically off duty.
Right.
And they can gain something from that. They can clear their mind and focus on certain things when they're not thinking about, I may be responding to a building fire in 5 minutes, so I can't super invest in tying these knots in this training that I'm doing. And that's just an example. That's just one example.
Yeah. I think that's a big one is, if you have, like we talked about, the advantages are that you get to do a lot of training on duty, but the downside is okay, if I have, I think we just got a second vortex system, right?
Yes.
But before that, it's okay, if I'm going to tie this thing up in this training and then a call comes in, what am I going to do if that's the call I needed on?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's definitely,
so a lot of these trainings, like you said, pretty much require a high degree of focus to be out of service, but you guys can never be out of service.
Right. I mean, we can go out of service. We can go out of service and do a training.
Yeah.
But if something comes in,
you're not really.
There are incidents and situations that only we can solve.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a responsibility on us to make get ourselves back into service and respond to that thing.
Right.
Aside from the fact that we just want to be default aggressive and get to these things.
I love that. Yeah. On an engine, you can do hose evolutions with the spare hose in the station and leave your pump intact, or just take one line off and still have all the rest, But some of the, like you said, some of the equipment that you guys carry is the only equipment that exists for it in the city. So it's a little bit different.
I oftentimes joke that when the department buys one of something, regardless of what it is, they know where it's going.
Right.
If we only own one of a thing, it's almost definitely going on the rescue. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things we like to do is we like to, I'll say we don't get every one of them, but when there are notable calls, especially some that are really difficult or noteworthy, like to give people shout outs when they're due. And this week we just saw in Allentown, Pennsylvania, they had a tech rescue. So I thought this is a perfect time to talk about it. They had a tech rescue, it was a trench rescue. And I know you have a lot of the details written down. So first of all, just wanted to say to Allentown, Pennsylvania and their mutual aid partners, so they got some district tech rescue teams in there. I believe they had a construction company that might have helped with the excavators and things like that. Just wanted to give a shout out. It seemed like a really difficult call. They had a trench rescue. It was a 9-hour operation, and they ended up pulling the guy out, which is of extreme rarity in trench rescue.
Sure is.
So I'm going to play a little snippet of a video from who was their tech rescue commander. And then I would love to get your input on that call, and kind of maybe you could talk to us about what goes into that, why it took so long, different things like that.
Sure.
Technical Rescue Team Commander.
What's your last name, Jeff?
Hammel.
What was the biggest risk here?
The biggest risk is the secondary collapse of the trench itself. The ground was unstable from the excavation to begin with. That's what we presume caused the incident.
You want to pause
with.
it for a sec? Yeah. So, so he says the biggest risk with the trench rescue is the secondary collapse. Real quick, do you want to just tell us what he's talking about there?
Yeah. So when they dig a trench, they've obviously compromised the soil that's underneath there, right? So oftentimes there's classes of soil. And so it goes from like the harder soils, clays, things like that, down to like sand.
Yep.
So we always classify in tech rescue, we always classify everything as type C soil or class C soil.
Okay.
And what that is just sandy soil, stuff that's not going to hold its shape.
Okay.
So if you imagine digging into creating a trench and whether or not that wall's going to remain intact or not.
Right.
It's the reason why we pour foundations, right? We have to push that earth back so that we can build our houses on it and whatnot. So with that, if we consider everything worst case scenario, which is the most collapsible soil available, then that's how we operate in the safest way possible.
Okay.
And so when you imagine that they were probably just operating an excavator prior to this, disturbed soil becomes unpredictable sometimes. And so that said, it was already compromised.
Right.
And so now you bring in a bunch of folks that are all working around this space and they're trying to walk on their 2 feet, and some of them are 200 to 300 pounds, depending upon the size of these firefighters.
Yeah.
The odds of them falling in at the edge of the trench are pretty high.
Okay.
So that secondary collapse would be they're walking around on what they believe is flat earth, but there's like a bell collapse or some kind of a collapse underneath where they're walking, where it's been undermined, and now they become the next victim in that situation.
So you guys sure and so sorry, just real quick, I want to point out that this is not in any way, shape, or form a critique of what happened. This is obviously a job well done. We just happen to have a tech rescue guy in house today, and this just happened. So we thought where we could use your expertise to kind of explain what had happened.
Yeah, I just want to be able to paint somewhat of a picture of what would happen.
What
I
types
imagine
of considerations.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I imagine they took all of those things into account.
Right.
It's so new that we're not actually going to get the breakdown of what happened for a little while.
Right.
So,
I sent an email out to who I think was their PIO, and I'm sure they're swamped with media inquiries and stuff at the moment.
Because it's so rare.
Because it's so rare.
Yeah.
And it's so rare to happen, and then so rare to pull somebody out who's alive. Just one question I have when you talk about the secondary collapse. So you shore up the walls, you talk about people walking above. Is there also risk of underneath, like where you're shoring like underground waterways and things like that could undermine that effort as well?
Absolutely. So some of the ones that have happened in the Massachusetts area. So Boston had a tragic loss of life. 2 folks were in a trench. They were working. My understanding is that during the excavation process, they had undermined a water pipe. The water pipe relies on the soil around it to support it under its own weight.
Right.
So once there's not that amount of soil supporting that water pipe, I believe it broke at a weak point in the pipe. And because the water wasn't shut down, it rapidly filled the trench.
It's a high volume and
Right.
pressure.
Right. So there's always the concern that is there some kind of water main break? Is something undermining this?
Right.
Is there an aquifer or some natural situation where the water table is high that makes the earth more pliable, more movable at that point? Right. So you absolutely have to take those things into account.
Awesome.
And sometimes in trench rescue, we have to pump water out just to make that situation somewhat tenable,
right?
So that we can make that rescue.
And I imagine that like up here, like you talk about like a water main or underground, but like if you start going into like, or maybe even around here, because we're pretty close to sea level, but I imagine if you go down to like Louisiana and there's a trench, there's water, as soon as you're hitting the first foot of dirt, you know what I mean? So
I mean, I worked for a little while. I had a side job working for a pool company, and not every time, but oftentimes we would excavate, and based on where we were at, we would run into water, and we would have to pump that out while we were trying to
Right.
put the pool in and stuff. So there's moving water underground that we don't always appreciate.
Right. You want to continue that, Nick?
So we took a lot of extra steps and safety precautions to prevent that from happening again.
How small was the hole that he was kind of working through right now to get him out? I was told it wasn't very big.
It was approximately maybe 30 inches in width, and I don't know about length, ballpark, and maybe 12 to 15 feet.
In your career, have you ever seen something?
So you talk about trenches, and I imagine you could have massive trenches, but we're talking, is this also is trench by nature confined space as well?
Absolutely. I actually have that in my notes. So trenches by definition are deeper than they are wide.
Yep.
Right? They're typically less than 15 feet across at the base, because if it's 15 feet wide, then at that point you start to call it an excavation rather than a trench.
Okay.
Right? So we imagine a trench is a thin area that was dug down deep into the ground. And then because of the nature of it, the limited egress, and the point that it's not designed for habitation, it oftentimes meets the definition of a confined space as well.
So this is just I have no real knowledge of trench rescue. So you're taking a 30-inch wide hole, and then you're putting shoring.
Yes.
And then you're putting people, and in this case, we're talking about heaters, and I'm guessing air supply, right? Because confined space, you have to monitor the air. That space becomes really small really quickly. Is trench rescue? I imagine nothing is always any one way, but is it generally always you dig down in this area and you're shoring as you go, or do you sometimes take that wider excavation approach to get down to somebody?
It would depend. So if there was major concerns about secondary collapse, you wouldn't want to use heavy equipment anywhere near there.
Right.
To the point that you would even want to shut down fire apparatus, because it would create enough of a vibration based on where it's located to potentially cause a slough in or some secondary collapse.
Right.
You would absolutely not want to use heavy equipment to dig away in the area of where you believe that person to be. You might be able to make some kind of, make something that was collapsing or questionable. You might be able to make it safe with a piece of equipment prior to the fire department arriving.
Yep.
But we try to preserve the situation as we find it, and that we don't want to make things worse.
Right.
And sometimes that creates challenges for us to build a beautiful trench box that's plumb and square,
Right.
And so, yeah, sometimes the terrain causes challenges for us. So we sometimes have to make do with that.
And that's kind of, again, going back to that, being able to have your crew doing the tactical objectives and being able to stand back and strategically and be like, you know what, actually, this doesn't look right. Maybe we change our approach or whatever the case is.
Yeah. And there's some limitations on what we can do for building, shoring out in a trench.
Right.
As far as if it's wide at the top and narrow at the bottom or vice versa, there are some limitations on how we can actually attack that, because the struts should not be operated beyond a 10-degree incline.
Okay.
Because you don't need to take out a level
right
to ensure that they're in fact level. You eyeball it.
Right.
But ideally you want those shores and those struts to be as level as possible, so that you're making sure that you're applying the proper amount of pressure to the...
You could then make something slide down or up by putting that pressure.
Exactly.
And then
right.
you have metal on soil, which isn't like sticky tape, right?
Exactly.
So you
right.
can actually make stuff move. That makes sense.
So the goal is to take the principles of shoring are to take whatever you put into that situation. The shore that you build is supposed to transfer the pressure or the strength of that shore to something that has large surface area and ultimately makes contact with good soil.
Right.
So you want to transfer those loads so that you simulate that hole was filled in while trying to maintain a space large enough to actually affect the rescue.
Interesting.
I mean, how dangerous was this?
Honestly, this is something that me, myself, I've only performed in training. So this
Shout
is
out
my
to this
first
guy.
time doing
It's
this
first
live
time.
rescue, to this extent.
He's not alone. There's a lot of us.
Yeah.
There's a lot of us that have only done
I
it in
believe it was
training.
approximately 12 feet.
You said it's rare. I mean, it's, on one hand, it's good that it's rare. On the other hand,
How you operated, how you dealt with him.
We were actually very fortunate with the soil. It was fairly stable. The way it collapsed, we had multiple void spaces around his body, which did make the conditions for him a lot better. We have good access all around 4 sides of the trench, so we were able to warm him, get him the medical care from the team doctors as well as the team paramedics, and then all the rescue personnel.
When you say warm, can you just tell us what
We
You can
use
stop there, Nick. So we'll kind of leave the video off from there and kind of just talk more about the rescue itself. But I think some important points is one is the guy, in addition to their skill, sounds like got a little bit lucky in just the way that the trench collapsed in on him. He had some void spaces.
I have some notes. I wanted to talk about the void space piece.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, dude, go for it.
So just a little factoids to know, right? So a cubic foot of dirt weighs 100 pounds.
Okay.
So imagine that being on a person's torso. Imagine somebody being in that trench and all that earth just collapses against them.
Yeah. Oof.
So that's only a cubic foot of dirt, right? Cubic yard of dirt weighs anywhere from 2,700 pounds to 3,500 pounds.
Jesus.
And to break it down into something that's a little bit easier to understand, a 5-gallon bucket filled with dirt weighs 65 pounds.
And you're talking about a 12. So this, I think the trench in total was about 12 feet by 12 feet by 30 inches.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try and do that math, but it's a lot of 5-gallon buckets.
And the long and the short of it is because he was trapped. So I read 2 different versions, absolutely up to his neck. Also possibly his chin was involved.
Yep.
So you're talking about all kinds of airway considerations.
Yeah.
Respiratory considerations just due to the fact of that heavy weight of soil against his chest. We're assuming it's a male. I think it was.
It is a male.
It was. So yeah, a lot of the dirt. Dirt is extremely heavy, and we sometimes take that for granted. And it might have been very difficult for him to breathe during this process, provided that there weren't those interesting void spaces that gave him some relief.
Right.
He may have been too trapped to dig himself out. And sometimes if your hands are pinned and buried, a lot of people are like, why doesn't he just start digging himself out? But it's a lot easier. It sounds a lot easier than
all that compressive force on you.
Yeah.
So was he completely like covered, or he is?
No, his face was out, but like I said, I don't know at what point his face was out. Because they were able to communicate with him immediately.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to go back to saying, so one of the things you mentioned is like the team docs. And I originally saw this on our Facebook page through the Allentown, Pennsylvania EMS. They made a post. And I guess they were treating him while this was happening. So like going back to having people that are trained and can be around this type of incident and provide medical care as they're going is huge, right? So we talk about like having medics on the rescue or for in our situation on the squads and things like this.
Do we have an established mechanism? Say we had an incident like this where we have physician. I mean, I'm sure it's like, do we have a physician that we could bring?
The Cambridge Fire Department currently does not have a relationship with a physician that we would bring to the scene.
Yeah.
Our medical director has taken the collapse medical training course.
Interesting.
I forget what the actual title of it is.
Yeah.
But he's taken that course.
Yep.
And he's very interested and involved.
Yeah.
So if
he's definitely the type of guy that would.
If he was on duty, we could definitely get him to come to the scene.
Yeah.
But we don't have like a memorandum of understanding with anybody just yet. I believe at the UASI level. So the community, the UASI communities, I think that they have a relationship with somebody. So if we called them in
we could get a
to
doc
assist,
from Boston,
they could probably bring a doc from Boston. I mean, I know that it's a little bit off topic, but they brought a dock up
for the shredder.
For that machinery entrapment, right? So there's it happens.
And they treated that person right there too.
So that would be, I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, Nick just threw something up. So
it's wrong. Sorry, keep talking.
All right.
It's 12 feet by 12 feet by 12 feet by 30 inches wide.
Yeah.
All right.
He was calculating the cubic footage. So when you get a call like that, obviously they're able to talk to this guy. Sounds like warming was a really big. If you continue listening to that, it sounded like warming this guy was like a huge part of the process,
even in the summer months.
Yeah.
So when you think about how deep you are, how deep it may be, and where that person is, it can be extremely cold. I've been at trench trainings before, where in the summer months, where rescuers or students complained at how cold it was at the base of that trench.
I mean, it makes so generally. I imagine
almost below the frost line.
Yeah, anywhere that you're going to be, almost anywhere in the country, you're probably going to be in wet soil at 12 feet deep, right? Or not anywhere, but a lot of places. And when you talk about like water, anything below 72 is considered like, back from my lifeguarding days, anything below 72 degrees got a yellow flag on the beach, just because you can become hypothermic,
right,
at a pretty decent rate. Anything below 72 degrees, and you're probably at least below that if you're 12 feet down, and then you have wet soil on top of it. You know what I mean?
At what point does it become magma? How far down do we have to dig where it gets warm again?
This is why Barry's here.
He didn't even have a job.
The mantle. When do we reach the mantle?
So I think
that's like 14 feet.
Below 5 feet, your starting temperatures, right, are 55 degrees or 52 degrees, something like that. So as long as it's shaded and there's no air movement down there, you're probably in 50-degree temps.
So that's those would be. Allentown, Pennsylvania, I think is still considered to be the Northeast, right?
Yeah, right.
And we're in the winter now.
In the thick of it, yeah.
So there were challenges there,
yeah, and
there would have been challenges probably even if it was, close to the summertime.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if the trench was filled to the brim, and I know that wasn't necessarily the case, we don't know exactly what it was, but if you just all the dirt that was removed from a 12 foot by 12 foot by 30 inch wide was 51,840 cubic feet of dirt.
It's a lot of cubic feet.
So 50.
Divide that by 3.
That sounds like a lot.
Times 100, right?
Yeah, cubic foot of dirt is 100 pounds.
That sounds like a lot.
Huge amount of weight.
Then times
12 by 12.
If you just do inches,
144.
it's 622,000 inches of dirt.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cubic inches of dirt.
Wow.
I mean, if you think about it that way, that makes sense. That's a lot.
So I think once they were able to, they arrived on scene. They saw that his face was exposed, which allowed them probably to take a breath and say that, well, this is good, right? They knew where he was, so they knew where to, because oftentimes
you don't know.
You use evidence at the trench to identify where the person is likely to be. Things like coffee cups,
right,
or their lunch pail,
right?
So if somebody was completely buried in a trench, you don't even know where to start at that point.
Yeah.
So there's major challenges just to that, right?
So you can't just start digging with an excavator.
No.
You would never.
Right.
You would never just start randomly digging, So
we have a couple photos that might go along with. I know you took a bunch of notes, so maybe if we throw some of these photos up, we could talk about. Maybe they'll go along with the notes, and you can talk about like what you might look at in. That's a lot of dirt.
Yeah. And you don't even really think about like the compressive force, like even like just being buried at the beach. Like, think about it. Yeah.
So while we work on the photo, so the airway was not necessarily in question in that moment, right?
Right.
He was probably communicating in some way, so they knew that he was at least moving air.
Yep.
So again, that's, as you move through the check boxes of like, what are we dealing with?
Right.
How quickly do we need to move? Yeah. That provided a little bit of relief for them, I imagine, to make some decisions on how to manage the situation as safely as possible.
Yep.
And then the fact that they were able to warm him and establish an IV almost as soon as they got access to, as soon as they were able to get vascular access, they started an IV.
Right.
And if they use warm fluids,
I was gonna say, I wonder if they use
that would be a way to warm him up.
He said they did, and later on in this interview, they said they use warm fluids, and they have. He said it's just like a propane heater, but it's specialized for doing this type of work. And they had those running in, and I don't know for sure, but maybe you can say probably that yellow soft piping is probably heating the air down there.
You can use that to introduce air into a space, or you can use it to remove air from a space. Right. It's traditionally used for con space, to make the area more tenable, but you could definitely use it to push warm air from the surface of the soil down into wherever it is that are these photos actually from this event?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So these were taken
really
off of social media. So, and so I think what we're looking at,
it's a vertical view on the right? Because the rope is going down into the
yes,
and the ladder, the rope and the ladder going down. So you're looking from the top of the trench to
that's deep.
Probably, I'm guessing where this guy's feet were, and I believe they said so. He was under about 5-ish feet of soil, which makes sense if he was buried up to his neck or his chin, and the total depth of the trench was 12. So I imagine that means he was standing on the bottom 5 feet up, so it was probably 6 feet just to get to his head. And this is all speculation, or somewhere in there. He wasn't at the surface of the he wasn't up at the surface. I mean, you can see how far down they're working right there.
Right. Because if it was, again, I wasn't there, but if his head was just at we'll call it at grade.
Yeah.
If his head was at grade, they might have just placed some ground pads down to spread out the weight of their body over a large surface area.
Yeah. And
they might have been able to just hand dig him out of there.
Right.
But the fact that they use strong backs, so that's what those red items are called. So the shoring panels and strong backs, the fact that they use those indicated that whatever they were faced with, that they had to make entry.
Right. And they had to go all the way down to where you can see like the end of that shoring.
Yeah,
which is
that's pretty deep. So we use the term cone of influence. So where each of those struts are, it can influence the soil in a 4-foot circle, in a 4-foot circle. So 2 feet in each direction around it, and then as a circle.
Wow.
So the pressures from that strut, as I said, the principles of shoring are to transmit the strength of the strut to something solid that has surface area to push that earth back.
Right.
And so based on the knowledge of the fact that a strut has a 4-foot cone of influence around it, that dictates how deep that is based on how many. So they may need to put 3 struts in to get to the bottom.
Right.
They may need to put 4 struts in to get to the bottom, but that's all determined by charts and information and trainings and things like that we all do behind the scenes. So
interesting. Wow. So you have a whole note on this. So do you want to just walk through?
Sure.
I mean, we have these photos, and do you just want to walk through like what the notes you took about what happened? And
yeah. So once you mentioned that you wanted to talk about this, which obviously it's an unfortunate event, but it's timely for our episode, right? So Allentown. So the population of Allentown is 125,000. They have 6 stations, 129 suppression personnel, 7 engines, 3 ladders.
Wow, it's just a slightly smaller staffed and just a slightly larger population-wise city than us.
So they practice or they deal in hazmat, EOD, underwater recovery, and tech rescue. And their tech rescue disciplines are structural collapse, high angle, con space, and trench. So this is just simple. This is simple information that I was able to take from their website.
Yep.
They don't. I don't believe that they have the heavy rescue staffed. It's in the fire station with their engine 10 and truck 1. So the call came in at approximately 2 p.m. There were 2 workers in the trench. The first one was able to self-extricate with the assistance of somebody placing a ladder in there. So I don't know if that was a bystander or a civilian, or if it was a first responder.
Right.
So that person was able to climb out. The first person was able to climb out on their own.
I imagine that they couldn't have been standing with the other victim when that happened, unless it was some weird, like the soil pushed him up, right?
Yeah.
He must have gone
Yeah,
in
you would
afterwards.
think that
somehow.
they'd both be in the same situation.
Yeah. Maybe it was a buddy that tried to jump in and get him or something. I mean, again, all speculation, but.
And sometimes it's just something as simple as if they had a ladder in the hole with them. You know, this happened, and he just happened to have access to the ladder,
Right.
like
or be climbing down at the exact moment it happened, or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So the person that had to be extricated was, like we said, he was in the soil up to his neck or his chin. So that was 2 p.m. At 6:20 p.m. roughly was when they were listed as their tech rescue assets came in from Scranton and Bucks County. But my understanding is that most of the soil was removed at that point.
Yeah, and I think the Bucks County tech rescue team maybe stayed in the station. I don't know if I had read something. One of them, I think, like went to the station, and one of them went to the scene. I think.
And based on what we know, so to a lot of people would say, "Geez, most of the soil was removed by 6:20. Why did it take until 10:18 to fully remove that person?"
Yeah.
Well, that comes into play with the weight of the soil.
Right.
Even if you're just stuck in tightly packed soil from your knee down,
right,
that may take a long time to get you out of that.
And not to mention, every foot you go down is more challenging because you're operating in a deeper trench. Now you have to move the soil another foot up to get it out. You have to do all this. So
correct.
So,
oftentimes we'll place the shoring panels into what feels like solid earth.
Yeah.
But as we start to excavate down, we have to transmit those shoring panels down into the hole with us.
Right.
So every inch, as you said, we decide to excavate, we have to bring that protection down with us. So it takes time.
The excavation gets slower, or the rescue gets slower as you get deeper.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so so they were able to actually fully remove this person at 10:18.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I had for my notes was that they had ALS present, and due to the fact that they established warm IVs and they took hypothermia into account and they tried to combat that to the best of their ability, I think has everything to do, in addition to the amazingly skilled job that they did in setting the panels and getting everything the way it needs to be. I think that the care during the process has everything to do with this being a positive outcome.
We use the term bedside care as a general term for like EMS, is like we bring care to the bedside.
Yeah.
This is that version of that, like bringing care into the rescue.
Yeah.
And I wonder with incidents like, you said this is a pretty substantial size hole, like if bringing in those teams was simply like they needed more struts. Like, I mean, I don't know how many we have, but like, it looks like, if you're going, I mean, that looks like 14, 15 feet deep. And like you said, the zone of influence or cone or zone. Cone. Like, you might need a lot of struts now.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, it might, you might call mutual aid in just for equipment.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you might need to relieve your people. I mean, we're talking about a long
rescue.
I think that's probably a big thing too, is relieving people. Like 6 hours digging in dirt is
high stress.
Listen,
too.
we all want to be in there and we all want to do it, but at some point somebody fresh is going to be more effective.
Yeah, you need to take a mental break. It's a high acuity, like you said, high acuity, low occurrence.
Yeah.
There have been certain stories that have been communicated of long-term rescues where skilled personnel that are instructors and masters in their field have asked for tools that were completely inappropriate at that point because they were just so focused in the situation that their mind starts to, every once in a while, I just got to say, let me take a step back. Let me look at this objectively.
Yeah.
The solution to the problem is outside of my very narrow view right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like that stress inoculation.
Yeah. So there's a pretty cool ending to this we'll get into one second. So, but real quick, in a 2-minute version of, obviously we see the stress, we talked about this, but just just a quick down and dirty, like, trench rescue. This is kind of the steps you take. So you arrive, you find the guy, start treatment, then what?
Yeah. So you identify where the person is.
Yep.
You do lockout, tag out to the best of your ability. Shut equipment down that's not necessary. That's running nearby, right? So you deal with that stuff. You do air monitoring to make sure that it's even habitable for you. And then if it's not, then you have to deal with that, whether you bring in a ventilation system to push bad air out or to pull bad air out or whatever. And then you're going to develop an action plan or kind of a direction where you can actually make entrance. So you're going to identify the safest way to get close to the hot zone, if you will.
Yep.
Because the hot zone is the trench itself.
Okay.
And the area around. And then the warm zone is where the people are that are assisting with that. And then the cold zone's obviously where the IC is and the media and all that other stuff, right?
Okay.
So you're still going to establish zones. You would ideally put ground pads down because, like I said,
just to transfer all the energy of people walking around.
So like a 200-pound person standing on a small, like the size of a pie plate on the earth, believe it or not, is exerting more pressure per square inch on the earth than an excavator is with big, gigantic treads, because it's all based on surface area, and an excavator could be 60,000 pounds.
So just a way to put this in perspective is for tech rescue is airbags, where you're talking about 15 PSI is lifting potentially 30,000 pounds. Correct. Because it's lifting 15 PSI, but it has 1,000 square inches. So that's 15,000 pounds of pressure it can put up.
So to that point, you would want to put ground pads down to try to disperse the weight of the people that are working around the trench to not create secondary collapses. And then you would start to bring in your panel team. So the folks that would be setting those red shore form panels with the strong backs, they would start to bring those in. And then there would be folks that would be placing the struts, shooting those struts to a pressure. It depends on which device you use.
Yep.
But oftentimes the accepted practice is you shoot those to 200 PSI. And then you set the collars and disconnect the hoses. So now it goes from being a pneumatic strut to a mechanical strut. You nail those in, and now that creates that space. It creates the safe space, the kind of build-in-place trench box that you need to effect that rescue. And then all the other things that go along with that. And then, depending upon what happens with the situation, ideally this was a positive outcome, but you might have to retrieve some of your equipment at some point too. And then that's a hugely hazardous situation, because now you have applied all these forces to previously unstable earth. And now if you want to retrieve your very expensive struts.
I was going to say, I don't know how much a set of Paratech struts is, but I imagine it's enough that you're not leaving them in a hole.
Right. So you have to be very careful when you decide to retrieve them. And that was, in fairness, you did ask for kind of a quick and dirty.
Yeah. No, that's perfect.
But yeah, that's what you would do.
One question I have is these strong back panels. You're going down to the level of like where the collapse ended, I imagine, right? And then so part of it is you have to dig that soil and get it out. Are you doing that with like buckets or?
Yes.
How far do you go down before you need to readjust and put another panel or put another strong back or lower the strong back so that you're not putting yourself at risk again?
So there's a bunch of different information out there, but I would feel uncomfortable being a foot underneath some level of protection.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, again, if you're thinking a foot by 12 feet by 30 inches, that's a lot of soil.
Yeah, and you would never want to be outside of your panel set, right? So one panel goes in, an opposing panel goes in.
Yep.
So that's considered a panel set. And then you put struts across, and then you commit rescuers into that space.
Gotcha.
So
but if you treat it like the floor is lava, if you can actually if you can be outside, I found a way to fit lava into the color.
Thank you.
Love
I
it.
appreciate that.
Love it.
I knew if we went far enough, we would hit lava.
But if you're outside that panel set,
yeah,
in training, that's one of the few times we actually raise our voice with the students. If you're outside that panel set, you're in an unsafe area.
Because in training, you're actually doing this in a real trench, I imagine.
Yeah, so I've trained in concrete trenches, which are safe. The challenges with those is that it becomes it's as
defeating
John
the
said,
prop.
it's like defeating the prop, right?
Yeah.
Are we defeating the prop, or are we rising to the challenge?
Right.
Yeah.
So, live trenches are the best way to train. It's just there's a lot of logistics involved with it.
Right.
So you have I'm looking at the picture. You have your vertical strong backs, and then you have, what are those? They run horizontally that the strut seem
The
to
shiny metal pieces?
Yes.
So those are called whalers or whales.
Yep.
And what those allow you to do is once you have those set, you can actually remove a strut because they're so strong on the horizontal that you could remove a strut to allow you access to the patient.
So it gives you more room to move around.
Yes.
Interesting.
Gives you more real estate inside that trench.
Would
so
you-
it transmits the forces across multiple strong backs.
Yep.
And then you can pull a strut out or
Okay.
a set of struts out and still be safe operating in there. So it would allow you to bring a Stokes in. Or
Okay.
a rope system.
Which I think they actually took the guy out on a Stokes.
Yeah.
Question for you though is, so you have two of those strong backs right next to each other, or is that one? There's two red pieces with a piece of like wood in the middle. Is that
Correct.
one?
So they determined, they're made out of typical plywood.
Yep.
Right. So the red portion there is approximately 4 feet across.
Okay.
And from the height of the red portion is 8 feet.
Okay.
And then they just round off the sides because if we leave them squared off, that becomes a place where they get damaged.
Okay.
And so it just makes it easier to store, manage, move, stuff like that.
And there's a gap of what I imagine if you're just a couple feet of dirt there.
And you also see the two strong backs.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple vertical pieces of lumber there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's called supplemental shoring or supplemental sheeting.
Okay.
And you can do that in situations where you're going to have a whaler span that space. So ideally, you're going to want those strong backs to be touching each other.
Right.
And have an opposing agent on the opposite side.
Yep.
But sometimes you don't need the real estate. So they probably needed something wider than 8 feet across.
Yep.
But they didn't want to bring another panel in there.
Yeah.
So it looks to me, just based on what I know about building materials, is I see panel, I see at least 1 or 2 2x12s there.
Yep.
And then I see another panel. So that's 4 feet wide, and then 2 2x12s, so that's 2 feet, and then another 4 feet wide. So they basically determined that they had a 10-foot area that they needed to work in.
Right.
So that was how they dealt with
And I
that.
also imagine you want to excavate or be operating in not the smallest footprint, but if you made that 12 feet, well, now you have to move 12 feet of stuff out of there.
Right.
So by making it 10 feet, it's literally 2 feet less that you have to deal with.
Right. And so similar to what we talked about earlier, as far as there is a way, not that they did this, but there is a way to overcomplicate things.
Right.
And so the goal is to be as efficient as possible.
Right.
So because they knew where the patient was, they were able to say, there have been situations where they've only used one panel set.
Right.
Based on the fact that they had great intel on where that person was.
Right.
So they were able to effect a rescue with one panel set. So ideally, the least amount of equipment necessary to do the job is the way to go.
Right.
Because sometimes if you overcomplicate it and somebody comes in and says, we're automatically going to use 6 or 8 panels on this.
Right.
That increases the amount of time before you're actually getting the person out of the space.
Gotcha. That's awesome, man.
Very interesting.
Anything else to add to that?
No.
So
other than the fact that they did an amazing job.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So
Yeah.
just to repeat again that this is a shout out because this is a rare call. It's a tough call. And I think if you go in for a recovery, it's a different mindset than when you have a savable life. And so like that burden of keeping that person alive weighs on you, I think, even more. So you have a savable life. So the stress levels are, I imagine, a little bit higher. And these guys just did an awesome job. So again, this is just a shout out to say, nice work.
Great job. Yeah.
Great job on a tough call. And you want to tell them the surprise ending that guy got?
Oh, yeah. So the story is that I guess very close to the final stages of his extrication, I guess his wife informed him that she was pregnant
with their first child.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So, cool. What a way to if that guy's getting
such an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. And all accounts, I heard he had some serious injuries or whatever, but he's expected to live and all that stuff.
And when you think about, again, going back to the weight and the forces of that soil, it makes it understandable as to how he might have had some significant injuries.
Injuries.
A lot of vascular injuries.
So great job, Allentown, Pennsylvania. Your rescue partners from the different tech rescue teams, EMS, police, public works. I think there was an excavation company. We talk about mutual aid all the time, and we can't always do this job by ourselves. So just a huge shout out to those guys.
Yeah.
I think on that note, that brings us to the end today. That was a awesome episode.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, LT. Really appreciate it.
We really appreciate it.
I'm glad I was able to come out.
Hopefully, like we said, this is the first of multiple times we can have you out. And we can get into some more of the actual technical training. So if anybody's watching this and they have something they're interested specifically in hearing about, please reach out to us. We'd love to, if we can, make it happen. Please don't forget to subscribe, the deal. And thanks for having us back for a season 3. We're pretty excited.
Boom.
Johnny?
Right. Lieutenant, thanks for the wisdom. JobTlks out.